In this lecture, we're going to be talking about how to make your habits stick. You created a new habit, or you're trying to replace an old habit with a new habit and it's working well, but how can you make it stick? We're going to go through some techniques so you can go on autopilot and transform this behavior that is not yet a habit. If it was a habit, it's already a routine. So, when you're working on something that you want to make it stick in your daily habit or in your routine, we are working on a behavior. And this is exactly why the techniques to go on autopilot are aimed to deal with behaviors and transform them into regular automatic habits. Now, one of the first techniques is using a time frame. Committing to a time frame, when you commit your habit to a time frame, whether it's 2 weeks or a month, you are ensuring persistence and eventually you are reinforcing the fixation of the habit. And that's exactly why daily habits are much easier to turn into a routine or an automatic behavior or a habit. So when it comes to time frame, there is a principle, a rule. It's called the 21-90 rule to create habits and lifestyles. And what this rule is all about is that it refers to the fact that it takes 21 days to create a habit and 90 days to create a lifestyle. So if you are able to create a habit and put a time frame and be consistent for 21 days, and then you do it again for another 90 days, you're not just forming a habit, but you're forming a lifestyle. You're forming an unconscious habit, an automatic habit that would work without you having to put any mental energy towards it. This is where your mind completely shuts down, and this is where if you don't engage or do this habit, you will feel that there is something missing. Second thing is smart relapse. What's breaking the chain? When we talk about habits, we're talking about a chain. We're talking about a loop. And usually people will relapse before being able to change the old habit that they have, or before being able to fix the habit. They will relapse many times before fixing the habit perfectly. So identifying the distractions or temptations that might get between you and your new habit would be a really good way to be doing smart relapsing. Now, once you identify them, you set triggers or cues in temptations, eliminate them or outsmart them. So every temptation that you know of will have a certain cue or a certain trigger. And once you know these triggers or these cues, or you set your own triggers and cues for these temptations, you just eliminate the temptations all at once, or you outsmart them. Now, what we mean by saying outsmart them is that you can, for example, replace them with other things, or change the entire temptation itself into another temptation, because usually temptations are also linked to a loop of a cue, a routine, and a reward. Now, smart relapsing also means that it is okay for you to relapse every now and then. We talked about this before when we talked about slipping into the old habit, and how people usually find that this breaks consistency and eventually it kills their motivation. Using smart relapsing, you will be avoiding these kind of pitfalls when they occur. And in case you don't really remember what we talked about when we discussed slipping, go back to the lecture and make sure to know all the details about smart relapsing, because in order for you to understand the concept of smart relapsing, you need to understand the concept of the 3-day misrule that we talked about earlier when it comes to slipping into old habits or old routines. Furthermore, a technique that we talked about before that is also essential to be able to fix habits and make them stick is writing it down. Committing to paper is one of the most essential steps to be able to keep up the consistency and the momentum. It creates effective self-pressure. Now, there's going to be an entire lecture that talks about effective self-pressure, and you'll be able then to understand more how writing it down can ensure effective self-pressure and therefore help you make the habits stick faster and turn these behaviors into automatic habits. And lastly, creating a cue, like an on-off switch. Create a cue that would fire up the habit loop to ensure consistency and repetition. What that means is a lot of people, they want to establish new habits. So let's say you want to start going to the gym, you want to start working out, and they say so, but then they don't create a cue. When you create a cue, when there's something, whenever this thing occurs and whenever this trigger appears, you would drop everything and go to the gym and exercise. When you create a cue for yourself for each and every habit that you're trying to make stick, whenever this cue occurs, and especially if you created the cue, you can control the cue, so you can make sure that the cue will happen again every single time at 6 p.m., let's say. And once that happens, you'll be able to get into the habit loop faster, and then you'll be able to fix the habit faster and avoid a lot of relapsing and a lot of slips. And at the same time, it will make the process of creating and fixing this new habit faster, because as we said, once you create the cue, you created the first part of the habit loop, and then the routine is automatic as you go into the gym, and then also you're getting the reward automatically because it is part of the loop, it is part of the process, and it is linked to the cue and the routine.